Each day, a list was posted at operations, and if you were scheduled to fly that night, you were required to attend the 1600 briefing. At the briefing, each flight crew was assigned an airplane, a departure time, the route to be patrolled, and the designated time window you were supposed to be in that route segment. Here's one of the briefing guys. The picture isn't very sharp, but it looks like he's pointing to Panmunjom with a warning to stay clear. Peace talks were occurring there, and we were cautioned to stay beyond a 50-mile radius. It's been common practice for combat crews to carry a blood chit. It was designed to help downed crew member get back to friendly troops. The Korean blood chit was a little square piece of silk sewed in a little pillow, and on the silk was a map with pictures and written comments that were meant for a reward to help whoever would help a crew member get back to friendly lines. In a few languages was a message stating a guarantee of up to $1,000. When we returned from our mission, the blood chit had to be turned in at the debriefing. Obviously, it would be a lucrative black market for the chit. It could be a long night, and one last go was just good planning. The tower controls all departures, and when your time nears to taxi, a call is heard from the tower. Crank 'em up and start the taxi. We take off at 10-minute intervals, and our call sign for our whole group are pintail. The first one off is pintail 1, then pintail 2, and so on. Takeoff on a dark, moonless night with a heavily loaded airplane was very intense. You immediately jerked up the gear, and as the runway lights disappeared, it was instant blackness. Any outside references didn't exist. The altimeter at 0, and you stared at the rate of climb indicator to make sure it didn't get below 0. As the gear doors closed, performance began to improve, and the altimeter started to move. Pretty soon you were climbing out, and by around midnight, all our airplanes were in the air. Northbound after takeoff, all pintails cruise at 240 indicated to keep proper spacing to Obo. Obo, the little red dot on this chart, has a radio beacon, and it's the final checkpoint prior to entering North Korea. Flight time to Obo was about an hour, and at Obo, all lights went out, and it's a good time to charge the guns and fire a little burst. It then varied in time from half hour to over an hour to get to the designated patrol segment. Once in the segment, the hunt and kill phase usually lasted 45 minutes. Now, this chart shows the railways of North Korea. As these are the main supply lines from China, they are also our top priority. And in the air, the B-26s owned the night, as there was never a threat from enemy aircraft. Our threats came from the ground fire of 20 and 40 millimeter guns. Their tracers were referred to as red balls, and seldom could reach higher than 4,000 feet. Our job was cutting supply lines, and there are many other squadrons doing the same job during the daylight. Also shown on the chart is Panmunjom in blue. Peace talks started here in the spring of 1951 and continued till the end of the war in July of 1953. We were not allowed to fly within a 50-mile radius of Panmunjom, and it was apparent when flying by it that the North was well aware that they were safe in this 100-mile circle. It was aglow with lights of activity. Trains and convoys from the North made gallant efforts to get there before we took them out. Our bombing strategy was dependent on clouds, moonlight, and terrain. I want to point out an effective bomb drop. Originally, we were taught to dive at 30 degrees, pull up, and after a couple seconds, release the bomb. It was very inaccurate. And a run with the Norden bomb sight required too much lead time in the dark. Our target didn't normally become visible soon enough. So I increased my dive angle to 60 degrees. The accuracy improved dramatically. Ray always kept accurate knowledge of ground elevation, and during a dive read off the altitudes. When I pushed the nose over, he started his call-outs, and his voice became louder and higher in pitch as we neared the ground. A one-motion yank of the yoke and punch of the bomb release worked like a charm. Strafing required a different technique. A steep angle of dive wasn't important, but remember, it was dark and we didn't use tracers. Tracers led ground fire right back to the airplane. We used API, armor-piercing incendiary, rounds in the guns. They make a flash when they strike the ground. The bad side was that there was a delay after a burst to see where they hit, and then you correct and fire again. Care must be taken, as there is a tendency to get too close for better accuracy, and there's always a chance the target may explode. Although the hard-nose had tremendous firepower, there were drawbacks at night. Muzzle flashes right in front of you compromised your night vision, and the nearby racket was annoying as compared to the wing guns. And then after firing some rounds from the nose guns, smoke drifted back into the cockpit. A sortie could last up to 6 hours, and it's often near dawn when we get back. The more distant northern patrol segments required more flight time. We always expended our entire bomb load. It wasn't permitted to bring any bombs back. Stress on the wings from a hard landing could be disastrous, but ground rounds could be returned. And a GCA, ground-controlled approach, is required after each sortie. It was just group policy to refresh the instrument skills of the pilot. Then we're off to turn in our chutes and go to the debriefing. There we turn in our blood chits and report on the mission. There was always a bottle of scotch and one of bourbon with glasses on the table. This baffled me, as I only drank a little booze at a party, but I was lucky, I guess, as some crew members were a bit shaken up and needed a calming jolt after a mission. We often had free time during the day, and Ray got permission to go off base and gather material for this fireplace and grill. I was really impressed with his masonry skills, and it was nice to sit by a fire in the evenings. For my free time, I like to check out an airplane and go to the range to practice strafing. There was a control shack at the range to warn you when the locals were too near the target. They liked to gather up the used brass shell casings. To them, they were valuable to sell for salvage. Also, we were free to barnstorm in the countryside, a pilot's dream. Following is a quick clip of such a little fun. One day we had a departure from our usual night routine, and I'm posing by my plane getting ready for a daylight raid, like the one shown earlier in a video clip out of Iwakuni. This is very different from our individual night sorties. We fly in formations, usually 6 to 8 airplanes. I always loved flying in formation. Whatever your assigned position, you never take your eyes off the plane ahead that you are joined up on. The lead plane is the only guy who can look around to see where you're going. Ray must have taken his picture of me staring intently at the lead airplane. That bar blocking my face is the auxiliary hydraulic pump handle. Bombing in formation is different from what we were used to in our individual night sorties. We follow the lead airplane. We do everything he does. When he opens his bomb doors, we open our bomb doors. And when he drops the bombs, we drop our bombs. In this photo, it's bombs away. Following are some photos of some of our bomb strikes. On a couple of them, I've added some sound just for effect. But notice how high the debris flies when one of these explosions occur. Also, when you're strafing, sometimes your target explodes. There's always a tendency to get closer and closer to get better hits, but flying through debris can take you out of the sky just as readily as gunfire. Well, that ought to slow them down for a couple of days. Many Korean towns like to build their factories near hills like this so they could erect this tall smokestack. There was one on Shinampo, which was on our return route after a night's mission. And if it was moonlight or the sun was starting to come up, it made a real inviting target. Now, usually most of my bombs were been expended, but I like to shoot at the thing. It was just inviting. You might have hit it. It didn't seem to hurt it any. One time I even fired rockets at it. Sometimes we were loaded with about 4 of these 5-inch rockets. They were huge things, and they made a tremendous noise when you fired them. But you couldn't hit anything. They were hung on bomb rails instead of coming out of tubes, and each one seemed to go in a different direction. To continue, please go to part 5, which will be the last part of the presentation.